most important person at the company, wants to talk to me, I've got to finish counting the animation loops, to find out if my game is even going to ship.
Right.
And at this point, I knew that we were way over 1,000, so I'm like desperation mode to finish that as quickly as I can. And she says, I understand. Her first words were, I'm Roberta Williams, and I understand that you have a theatrical background. And I said, well, yes, I do. And she said, we've interviewed everybody in Oakhurst and everybody in Fresno, and we have not found anyone to voice Cedric yet. I'm hoping you can do it.
Wanted to get kind of a deeper understanding of who you are and your career. So you remember Mensa, right?
I was.
Yeah. So most people would know you as the voice of Cedric the Owl, but a lot of people in the industry would know you as a programming genius. So how'd you first get started with the computer industry or programming in general?
I took my first computer programming class in high school when senior year. When between junior and senior year, we did the big college tour, and at MIT, they had an early version of Space Wars, and I was kind of hooked on computers and the possibility thereof. But I didn't go to MIT because I was entering college at 17, and I didn't feel ready to be 3,000 miles away from home.
Right.
Which may have been a mistake, but that's what I felt, and things turned out in a way that I'm not unhappy.
And
so, go ahead.
And around what year was this?
I graduated high school in 73.
Okay.
So, instead of going to MIT, I went to Pomona College. I'd had some difficulty studying calculus at 7 in the morning, which is because it was at 7 in the morning. And I wasn't certain that I wanted to go to a really hardcore, dedicated math science kind of school. I thought I should keep my options open. Because I like to say that I've always been a generalist as opposed to a specialist. There's no single game that I play. There's no single hobby that I do. I've got an extensive list of things I've tried and done pretty well at. I've sung operas. I've sung at Carnegie Hall. I was a super advanced car rallyist, which is a specific title as opposed to a generic term. That was the highest ranking back when I was doing car rallies. I played softball. I have a national title at bridge. I've been on television. I worked 10 years at the Renaissance Fair. I ran Los Angeles Mensa's role-playing game group for more than a decade. And despite Cedric, I think I'm best known as the author of Eric and the Gazebo.
Right.
It's
The story of a player fighting against a gazebo, right?
Right. And the actual incident was very short and ended with the dungeon master asking, "Do you know what a gazebo is?"
Right.
But it's been translated into 7 languages. There have been a couple of videos made of it. So I can get into any role-playing game in the world by saying, "Hey, I'm Richard Aronson. I wrote Eric and the Gazebo." And boom, I'm in. Of course, they expect me to be funny like that all the time, whereas that was a story. I wrote it based upon the incident.
So did you start with the role playing games early, or when did you start getting into that?
In 1977, shortly after I graduated, my former girlfriend was talking to me one day about other stuff. Oh no, we met on the street outside where we both worked in downtown Los Angeles. I was working at the library, and she told me that there is this new game called Dungeons and Dragons, and it would be perfect for me. And since we knew each other fairly well, I took that to heart and did some research and found out that there was a Mensa D&D game. And there was also one at UCLA and one at Caltech. And the one at Caltech seemed most happening, but Mensa was a lot closer to where I lived at the time. So I started playing late in, I guess, 78 at Corey Cole's Mensa game. And I thought the game was terrific, but I thought the world was not unified. And D&D at that time did not have the kind of emphasis on the world that they do with 5th edition. Chivalry and sorcery had an integrated world where the reason why the magic worked and the reason why the monsters were, everything was focused. And whereas Dungeons and Dragons or Greyhawk, not quite the same thing. Corey recommended that another place I might play was La Maison de Guerre, a game shop up in the valley where I've met arguably the 3 best game masters I've ever played under. And I think I'm as good as one of them, but I'm not the best.
And was this Corey Cole, who is this one of the Coles that was at Sierra later on?
This is the Corey Cole who persuaded me to work for Sierra.
Yeah, so yeah, that's really interesting. So you guys had a history of these role-playing games going back before Quest for Glory and all that, right?
Yes, we did.
Wow. So you started in the 70s, and then a decade later, like, carried it over to digital.
Not only that, but I've known Corey longer than Lori.
Oh, really?
And if you want some Corey and Lori trivia, that Corey's forgotten because I have this freakish memory. And I remember when Corey first met Lori, and I remember it was on a weekend that he canceled the game because he was going to Arizona to go to a convention. And I remember when she was coming out to Westchester to visit him for the first time, and how nervous he was because he really, really liked her. And he'd said that in a way that made me feel that he'd never really, really liked anyone before. And that worked out real well.
Yeah, wow.
Okay.
That's great.
But after the first game, I thought, what is the metaphysics? Why does magic work? How do all these things integrate? And why is society so haphazard at integrating magic into society? I mean, there had to have been a Henry Ford in a magical society who would have come up with mass production methods. And the largest quantities of magic, they would have been household magic. Just the way that the largest quantities of technology these days, they're household technology. They're Roombas and refrigerators that you can call, and dishwashers and all these other things that save labor, because those are a lot more valuable on a day in, day out basis than magic swords. So I spent about 6 months designing my world from the ground up, and had it ready to play by April of 1978. It was based on the D&D system, but there was a lot added. And I had to build a history of the world, and I had to build quests, for the players to do that impacted the world. And so I created a great quest and a few smaller quests, and I've been running that world off and on ever since.
Wow. So still going today?
Well, actually, it'll be going on Sunday, but yes.
Wow, that's fantastic. So when you were, so were you in computer science from the get-go when you started college?
No.
Oh, really?
I was in computer games from the get-go. Part of the reason I chose Pomona was every student had free unlimited computer time. So I guess in one sense I did computer from the get-go. At that time, the only language I knew was Fortran, which was the high school class I took second semester senior year.
And were you all punching out the paper strips?
Oh, yeah. We took a bunch of punch cards home, and I used one of my mother's knitting needles to punch out my program while watching TV. And then I'd bring the program back in, and every Friday they'd send it downtown because weekend computer time was cheaper than weekday computer time. And then on Monday morning I'd find out if it worked or if it didn't.
Yeah, if there's one little typo in it, the whole thing's gonna break, right?
That's right. So the whole class was based on how many computer programs you got to work.
Oh, nice.
and none of them was more than 100 cards, or at least for me, none of them was more than 100 cards. And 5 was an A, and 4 was a B, and 3 was a C.
Yeah, I guess.
The first one was Hello World kind of thing.
Right.
So it was dead easy.
So so when you started Sierra, you advanced pretty quickly as up to lead programmer after just a few years, right? No?
No. I was hired as a lead programmer.
Okay, so how did you what got them to hire you like straight to the top like that?
Well, it started. I was working at the library, which was kind of my dream job, because boy, could I read books. And then Proposition 13 passed in California, and I felt that any career in government was going to be a lot slower to reach the decent pay levels after that. So I decided I needed to have a career change, even though I liked the library. And I wrote down a list of everything I liked to do, and then I crossed off everything that I didn't feel I could make a full-time living at. So I wasn't sure I was good enough to be a full-time bridge player. I didn't like playing trumpet well enough to be a full-time trumpet player, and that's also a risky business. And I just went down, and the only thing that was left that I wanted to do and that had air conditioning, because the downtown library, it was not air conditioned, and when it got I think it was 85 degrees inside in the summer, then we had to close the library, and it was very warm working there. So what was left was computer programming.
Oh, wow.
So I switched to a job working for Carolyn Simon, who had been one of Corey's and my role players in our games back then, and I worked for her for about 6 months, but she'd hired me after the best 3 months she'd ever had, and 9 months later they were still the best 3 months she'd ever had, and she couldn't really afford a second person. So I had to find another job, and a friend of mine that I'd met at La Maison de Guerre, Jonathan Hall, who I still game with regularly, he had an opening at his company for someone with some computer background, and I interviewed well enough and went there, and after a year and a half, I learned enough to know that that was not a really safe or secure job. And I'd met my girlfriend, Cynthia Turner, who's been my wife since we got married. I met her at a Mensa charades party, and I only joined Mensa to play D&D. And so I'd done that and met her, and she said, "You can get a much better job." And so I did, and started programming escrows for 5 years for Crocker Trust Company. And then Wells Fargo Bank bought Crocker Bank. Those were like the third and the fourth largest banks in the country at the time. So that was a huge merger, and everything was uncertain. And I had no more promotion potential within the company because my boss was an assistant vice president, and I had no more up without displacing him. That little part of Crocker wasn't big enough. So I started looking for a better job and found one at Litton Industries corporate headquarters in Beverly Hills. And that was just an absolutely terrific job for me. And I would have stayed there until I retired or they fired me, except Corey and Lori came back into the picture, and they asked me if I wanted to make games for Sierra Online. And I was cool to the prospect. I still didn't believe that computer games were a real safe industry, and I didn't like the pay cut I was going to have to take. And the job that I had at the time, I had a private office, and if I told my director that I needed a scanner in order to adequately complete the project he just gave me, and if I told him that in the morning, I'd come back from lunch and a $5,000 scanner would be at my desk.
Oh, wow.
Okay, whereas at Sierra, when I started there, all the programmers shared one line printer. Okay, and they'd lost the manual, so they didn't have a program to print anything and have it line up at all well. And you kind of need a printout if you're going to do a code review.
Yeah, right.
You know, I mean, once laptops really became feasible, then that changed things somewhat. But back then, you really needed a printer. So one of the first things I wrote at Sierra, and this turned out really well. I knew everything you needed to know about printers because my job working on escrows involved printing a lot of different forms. And when laser printers came along, I added laser printers, and when local area networks came along, I added those. So I knew how to talk to printers, I knew how to talk to networks, and so I wrote a little program. It didn't take me more than an hour to print out every ASCII character one by one, and then I could reverse engineer the missing manual. But Sierra used its own interpreter, which was called SCI.
Right.
I did a fair bit of work in COBOL, and I started in Fortran. So all these different languages you wrote in source code, where the words looked something like English, but the computer will find a way to misinterpret them if you let it. And so it's like I describe programming as trying to teach a brilliant 3-year-old how to follow the steps to do something, only you're working in a language that the 3-year-old understands in a different way than you do. So if you make a mistake, it's going to do it wrong, and it's going to complain about it.
And you were a professor for several years later on after Sierra, right?
Yeah.
Right. So when you started at Sierra, did you just spend the first couple of months learning the SCI engine?
That was some of my duties.
Uh-huh.
But let me get back to how I got to Sierra. Corey and Lori came up to us because we were good friends. We were at their wedding. They were at our wedding. Actually, we were one of the people that brought them a potluck wedding cake, white chocolate from the Biltmore Hotel, and they said, "How'd you like to come to Sierra and make computer games?" And I didn't really like that idea. Big pay cut. I had things really going in Los Angeles. I mean, everything I thought was just about perfect. With my parents were around to help babysit when we needed it, and sometimes our daughter didn't want to come home with us after that. And we had a good social life, and we owned the house, and we lived in West Los Angeles, which is warmer than most of the rest of the LA basin because of proximity to sea breezes. And it was great.
So that was a big change moving out to Oakhurst after that, I guess.
Well, it was just that everything was right, and I kind of said no. And then they told Cynthia, there's no smog in Oakhurst. And Cynthia turned to me and said, "Richard." And so we researched it, and based upon what we could get for our house and what they were offering us, which was about a 1/3 pay cut for me, but about a 40%, but a much larger pay cut for my wife.
Uh-huh.
Okay, because she has a degree in computer programming and mathematics, so she's a real hardcore programmer. I'm just this guy who's picked up some languages that I taught myself and found that I could make a career of it. So she's the real computer genius of the two of us. And I don't consider myself a computer genius. I just consider myself a solid programmer who actually works at it. And there's a lot of better programmers than I am that do not work for 8 hours a day. And I mean, nobody can really work for 8 hours a day, but I'm good for a solid 6. And there's just too many. The brain has to bob in and out of it. So the first time Sierra tried to hire us, and we didn't even know we were on a job interview. We were just going to lunch with friends of Corey and Lori in Oakhurst at the pizza factory, and then they offered us a job, and we researched it, and we just didn't see a way that we could afford to do it. So we declined, and a year later, they asked us again, and the housing market had boomed, and Cynthia's company was going to have a massive layoff the following November, about a year later, and at this time to accept. And I moved up there in January of '91.
Okay. What was your wife? So she was working at Sierra too. What was she doing there?
Well, when she came up in November, she went straight to the Sierra network.
Okay.
Which needed her expertise with servers.
Okay. And later on, you joined her on that project, right?
Yes. Okay, so we'll get up to that, but
yeah.
I'm trying to stay chronologically so that nothing
right.
Skipped.
Yeah, I was just thinking about it.
All right.
So
I had 10 years of increasing managerial and supervisory experience as a senior and a lead programmer, and Sierra hired me without telling me that one of the reasons they hired me was I'd been at real companies with real HR procedures, and I'd had to fire a programmer, and every time until that point that Sierra had fired any of their people, they got sued for it, and they lost.
Wow.
And they were tired of paying out these these large settlement fees to people they didn't want to have anymore. So I got hired, and they gave me a whole lot of people that they were not sure were worth keeping, and they didn't tell me this, which was, in my opinion, a huge mistake, because I would have managed better if I'd known that that everybody needed closer supervision. And I got sort of a clue when I was working on Longbow, and we had a really good programmer who loved to code. And he'd work on a project for 6-8 months, even if it was a 3-week project. And he was working on 9 Man's Morris. So it was supposed to be a 2-week project. And you know, 9 Man's Morris is a simple game, and it's just not that hard for the AI, because it's tic-tac-toe on steroids, and it's very easily computerized. And I went over after 2 weeks, and he said, I can't stop the computer from hanging at this point. And this point was the first move. And I turned to him and said, what are you doing? Well, I'm calculating the best possible move based on all future progressions. And I said, you don't do that for the first move of this game. There are 4 equally good best first moves. Here, 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 and here. You pick one. You pick another one and your second move. If one is still available, you pick a third one unless you need to avoid an immediate loss. That's all. You know, I mean, in tic-tac-toe, the middle square is the best first move. You know, if it's there, you take it. And you will never lose. You might not win because tic-tac-toe is too simple a game, but you'll never lose.
Yeah, today there's, you know, entire courses on this very topic, but back then, you know, you're having to innovate a lot.
Right. And for those interested in computer nerd history, the very first computer game was Noughts and Crosses, which we call tic-tac-toe, but it was developed in England. So, you know, this is a known programming problem. I didn't know that information at the time, but you know, I study, I learn, and I take my profession seriously.
So it's pretty wild that you were, you know, hired straight into the lion's den with a group of people that maybe you were expected to lay off in like a legal way. That's pretty wild.
What to me is wild is that they didn't tell me.
Right.
So, I needed to manage people differently than I would have ordinarily, and I had to learn all these things for myself, which I guess is a reasonable test to give to a new lead programmer. How quickly does he catch on? But nonetheless, it put the game at risk of missing a chip date.
So was the culture there like very different? Like, was the culture amongst the programmers very different compared to your work at the Bang?
Yes. That's the simple word. I mean, one of the first things I noticed when I was at Sierra, because I'd spent so much time doing networking, is that we had one Novell network, and not a very big one, for all the programmers and all the artists. And I, in one of the programmer meetings, and I think it led to a meeting with Ken, I said, we don't have enough servers. If we have one machine fail, nobody can work. And he said, we've been looking at that problem. I guess I need to give it higher priority, if I recall. And it turns out they did have a server on order, or did shortly thereafter. But I also told him that to slow down every programming team, because they'd gone from a flex time system that some programmers were abusing. There were a lot of programmers abusing things there. When I started,
so you could just come whenever you wanted and leave whenever you wanted.
Within certain limits.
Oh, okay.
But that meant that different teams would adjust their time so that not everyone was pushing the server at the same time. And that slowed things down. If 2 games were compiling at the same time, then the server performance just dropped dramatically. And since every game in development, once they go into testing, starting in, say, September, October, when every game is testing every night, everyone had to do a compile before they went home. So Sierra's process was actually very, very efficient. And I state that as a professional opinion who worked for some really good companies. The artist would usually come into work as soon as possible, because a lot of the art was being done from hand-drawn painting that was scanned and oil paints. So that was a terrific time for the artist. The earlier the better, to catch the morning sun. And morning sun just helps them do their job better if they're doing oil painting. And programmers would start showing it.
Sorry, was there an outdoor studio then for the painters to be doing their work?
Wish there was.
So just through the windows, okay.
And the windows didn't open.
Oh, yeah.
Again, it was a very large building, the warehouse, and we left the doors open whenever the weather was good enough, but nonetheless, that was an issue. And something that works fine if you only have one artist or maybe 2 artists painting can possibly become a little bit dangerous if you've got 6 or 8 artists painting at the same time. Generally, only the lead artist was doing the paints. But still, if you've got 8 projects, that's 8 artists, and the fumes could accumulate. So the artists were working in their own room, and I actually do not recall where the painting was going on. Everyone else was doing digital art based upon the scans of the painted images.
So they were doing the touch-ups afterwards?
And touch-ups afterwards. Everything else at that point was done digitally. What we'd call concept art was what was painted. So for Longbow, how did Robin Hood look? How did Maid Marian look? How did all of Robin's named merry men look? So you'd have close-ups and images, and the paints would help define the base palette that we used. So on a computer game, a palette is the list of colors that are in the scene. And for, I believe, all of Sierra's VGA games at that time, there was a base palette, generally 64 colors, that were defined as being in every scene. And then the other 192 colors, because the difference between EGA and VGA was it went from 32 colors to 256. And much smaller pixels. So we could handle more colors, technically, for people who had the right monitors. And we needed to convert down to, I guess EGA was 64. So the base 64 had to be everywhere, and SCI had a converter that if you were playing a VGA colored game on an EGA screen, that it would translate the other 192 back into the base 64.
Okay, right.
Okay, so there's a lot of smart programming going on behind the scenes in Sierra's games.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that in particular because yeah, Longbow has some of the most beautiful pixel art in any game. It's absolutely amazing. And so it looks like all of that was like for the characters. Were those did y'all bring in like actual actors to like dress up and play the parts, or was that all just by hand?
That had all happened before I started, so I can't answer definitively. I think most of them were just drawn from vision or whatever Ken Ushue thought of. But I do know that Maid Marian was based upon, or let me phrase that. I was told that Maid Marian was based upon Brian Hughes' girlfriend.
Okay.
And he was a lead programmer and a programmer on other projects, but he came onto Longbow. Once other games finished, Sierra had a pattern of moving programmers who were off their projects onto projects that were in the final push. And that violates the mythical man month, which is one of the basic textbooks to read if you're doing anything in computers, or really if you're managing any project. But adding new people to a project late in a project makes it later.
What's the name of the book again?
The Mythical Man Month.
All right.
And the first edition is real short, less than 200 pages, and very funny in all the failures. It was based upon building what had been at that time the largest single piece of code ever written, which was IBM's mainframe operating system. And one of the key things is if you bring new people onto a project, onto a late project, you're making it later because the people who actually know what's going on are going to be spending time answering questions to bring these new people up to speed.
Right.
So it seems counterintuitive, but more people can get it done, and that works for if you've got to move a pile of rocks. But it doesn't work for knowledge workers such as computer programmers. Computer programming requires diving very deep into the guts of a computer program that you've written in a language that's not your native tongue, and finding out what's working and what's not working. And every programmer I know, or at least every good programmer I know, can get so deep into it that just having someone ask them a question can be like a kidney punch in breaking them out of how deep they have to go. And it can take half an hour or more for some people to get into that state within the code. And while you're in that state, you ignore that you're hungry, you ignore that your bladder's full, you're really focused on something that our brains didn't evolve to do. But good computer programmers get deep into it.
Yeah, there's a lot of meditation involved. Yeah, I run every day, and so yeah, I'll often be writing code while I'm running in my head, or I'm sure you'd be like laying in bed, writing code for the next day, right?
Never.
No, really?
I do my best coding in the shower.
Nice.
And I'm not the only one, but there's just something about water. I'm definitely a water kind of person, and the shower just helps me clear my mind of the things. Part of it is the auditory, where the sound eliminates the sound of the shower itself eliminates other distractions, and so I just close my eyes and my body's relaxing with the hot shower, and that's when I think about the hardest single problem that I need to solve that day. And that works for me. Everybody has their own techniques, and some people are so good at it they don't need them. So
Longbow, has a lot of screens and also a lot of close-ups. So was every room of the game originally an oil painting, and every close-up were those all oil paintings to begin with, or just the concept art?
I cannot say. As I said, the way Sierra started a game was they pick a designer and the game concept. They'd hire a lead programmer, or they'd have a lead programmer. They choose a lead programmer. They choose a lead artist, and they choose a producer. And for some games, the producer was the designer. Roberta and I think Allo had that. And there were different progressions beyond that, but that's how you start. And the designer starts talking about what the game's going to be, and the artist and the programmer and the producer, if the producer is not the designer, take notes. And when they're done, the artist will have a plan on what needs to be done and start storyboarding. And the storyboards were hand drawn, and they included the close-ups, the close-up beats that were necessary. The backgrounds may or may not have been drawn, but the storyboard was hand drawn, so probably they all were. So you can reuse a room. We call them pictures. But the file type was a PIC, and then most of Sierra's vernacular comes straight out of theater. So you had props, which were anything that an actor could carry, and the actors were actors, and so forth. Just straight out of theater with a lot of that.
Right, and I think it's kind of interesting if you ever look up like the history of digital films. They'll have the first feature-length digital film as Toy Story by Pixar, but really at Sierra, that's what you guys were doing. You were making full-length digital movies, really, which was a gargantuan task. I was curious about the workflow. So as lead programmer, how did you split up the jobs for the other programmers? Did you have like one person doing the text boxes throughout the entire game, or did you have like one person working on the beginning and one person on the end, or?
Well, some of both, but this is based upon what resources I had on my team and the amount of known talent I had on my team. So I'm sure that Warren had different plans, but maybe mine was better because I wasn't tainted by this is the way we've always done it. So what I started with was we had the storyboard, and I plotted out the regions. Okay, so in Longbow, a region might be Nottingham, and a region might be the forest, and a region might be the monastery and the fens. Okay, several rooms that all have the same kind of thing going on because of the people there, and each region would have its own palette. So we could have much better uniforms for everybody in Nottingham, for all the sheriff's men. Okay, and then you have an entirely different visual tone elsewhere. And then each region was generally at least 3 rooms, and I mostly assigned a region to a programmer, or at least a region to a better programmer. And within the regions, you've got to program all the rooms. So a region is going to have its own variables that are regional, and then there are also global variables, universals. We don't want to use many of those because they affect the memory footprint of every room in the game.
Yeah, I think, didn't Ken have a ban on global variables pretty much?
No.
No, really?
No one ever told me that. He may have done so for a while and then realized he had to.
Oh, okay.
Because globals is the only way to transfer information from one region to another.
Right.
Okay, so for longbow, if you don't know how many merry men are still alive, you can't do that game.
Right, right.
If you can't tell how many coins Robin Hood has wherever he goes, then you can't do that game. That's just all there is to it. You need to have universal variables, and then there's a ton of flags. And the advantage of a flag is it is a bit. So you could get 8 flags in one ASCII byte, and so flags are really a very efficient way of transferring information that just has to be yes or no. Has Robin Hood saved Maid Marian was a key factor in longbow, as it turned out. So yes, we were discouraged from using them more than necessary, but it wasn't. Nobody told me I can't.
Right. Yeah, I tend to use a lot of global variables, but I can see how if you're working with multiple people that it could result in some glitches. So this game didn't have a lot of glitches when it shipped. So what was your testing process to make sure it would run so smoothly?
Well, I had come to Sierra with 10 years of programming experience. The first 5 I was working on escrows, and if the test escrow doesn't balance to the penny, and anyone that's owned a house has gone through an escrow, and that means you have to calculate all the payoffs. An interesting side story, I believe I was the first programmer in the country to tell Microsoft that they had a Y2K problem in the early 80s.
Oh, really?
Because the way Microsoft did its year calculations was based on a Julian date going back to January 1st, 1900. And a Julian date is you just count the number of days you have been since 1/1/1900, and that tells you where you are in whatever current year. And so that's a very foresighted kind of thing, except they didn't realize that 2000 was not a leap year. And a lot of people didn't know that at the time. So I'm working with a 30-year escrow that has to balance to the penny, and if it doesn't balance to the penny, we can't work anymore. The state of California would shut us down until we fixed it. So I found this test escrow problem in the early 90s and told Microsoft, and they did nothing about it. So I blame them a lot.
Nice.
And that's I'm off the original question again. Do you have that?
I was wondering, I also wanted to ask, so during this time, when you were at Sierra, were you still playing the role-playing games with the Coles?
Well, the Coles just wanted me in Oakhurst so I'd run my game for them. They didn't care how much money we lost off our salaries.
Right.
They just wanted a good dungeon master and a good role player for when Lori ran, and other friends of theirs would come into town. They came to Sierra out of San Francisco, and a lot of their San Francisco friends would come in once or twice a year for what they called an aardvark con. And most of them would stay at the Cole's house on whatever you could do, and there's a lot of planning around the cooking. It was usually Thanksgiving weekend and Easter weekend, 2 a year, and we'd play D&D in 2 sessions a day for as long as people were there.
Oh, wow.
And some of the overflow people would stay at our house. So this was going on, but there weren't really enough gamers in Oakhurst to keep a game going all the time. So I'd write one-offs, and after a while Jim Kadick moved into Oakhurst, so we had 3, and 3 was sort of enough, and their son Michael would play as he got old enough. So with 4 players I can run a game.
So was that the main clique you hung out with at Sierra? Was the Coles? I guess you had a whole family life going on as well. But
well, yeah.
Yeah.
And I developed other hobbies in Oakhurst. So I started singing, and with the Sierra Chamber Singers, and that led to singing with Fresno Grand Opera. And so I know some non-Sierra people pretty well, but of the people in Oakhurst that I'm still in regular contact with, it's Corey and Lori.
Yeah.
So really what happened for me was different than from what happened to anybody else starting at Sierra. I started there, and I'm ready to start learning the language and coding and showing them that I've got game sense and theater sense. I've got a large acting background. And Bob Heitman comes up to me. He used to be in charge of programmers, but it's a tough job, especially at Sierra, where you want non-typical programmers, because creativity and working together is a real big thing at Sierra. So programming skill is important, but maybe game sense is more important. And he said, "We have a problem on your project." And I said, "Okay, what's the problem?" And he said, "I'm not sure that your game can be done in the time it's needed. And that's because I don't think that anyone has actually done a complete list of all the artwork that is called for by the storyboard." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "And I don't think expecting Ken or Garuka to do that when they should have done it months ago is going to work. I think we're going to have to do that, because that's the way it always works at Sierra. The programmers have to fix everything. So I want you to take however long you need to go through the storyboard and build a complete list of each animation loop you're doing, and that the game is called for, so we can actually figure out when this game is supposed to ship, or maybe solve a problem if it's too late."
And we're trying to get it out around the same time as the Kevin Costner Robin Hood film, right? So I guess it was...
that was a factor. And there was also a Robin Hood TV show and another Robin Hood movie that wound up getting canceled.
Oh, okay.
Because there was too much Robin Hood stuff.
Yeah. I will say
okay.
It was pretty brilliant of Ken to kind of see ahead of time, though, that Robin Hood was going to be a thing. I don't know. I was pretty impressed by that when I read about that.
Well, a lot of the designers follow Hollywood closely with good reason. So I wasn't there at the original discussions, but it may have been Christie whose Conquest of Camelot was successful, and they wanted her to do another game, and she may have heard about it and said, "How about a Robin Hood game?"
Right.
So it may have been her, it may have been Ken, it may have been anybody. I really don't know.
Yeah.
Ken used to take his family every Friday night down to Fresno, where the movie theaters were just better.
Mm-hmm.
And they'd have an evening, they'd go to a big movie that they all agreed upon, and then Monday morning he'd come back with all kinds of ideas.
Gotcha.
And I was told by Heitman and Chris Iden that we used the whim approach to Ken's Monday ideas. What's his idea on Monday? WHIM.
Right.
And we'd always listen carefully and attentively and ignore it. If he asked for something 3 times, he was serious about it. It had stuck in his head as opposed to just being a random idea. And then we had to seriously consider it and look at it and start figuring out if we had the resources and time to program it. But we had to wait for, he said, just wait till you have the 3rd request before you do anything. Ken pushes very hard, and all of our schedules are tight, and Ken has not estimated how long his Monday ideas are going to take. He just wants to see if he can get more into the game. If it sounds terrific to you, then discuss it with the designer or discuss it with me.
Yeah.
You know, Chris Iden was managing programmers when I started. So Longbow was late from the start because I spent 3 weeks going through the storyboard counting up animation loops. Fortunately, I've always been a big fan of animation, and we belong to the Animation Society. And the Animation Society is where I learned how to put the warble in my voice for Cedric.
Right.
That was Bill Scott, who was the main voice for all the Rocky and Bullwinkle cartoons, any male hero type out of J. Ward Enterprises he voiced. And we heard him lecture on how he voiced Super Chicken once, and that brilliant modern day technique of putting my Adam's apple up and down as fast as my right hand could move it. That was the high tech behind Cedric.
Oh, so you're actually putting your hand on your throat to make it warble?
Yes, I can do that right now. A lot of pain.
Yeah. Wow.
And I didn't want to do Cedric, but we'll deal with Cedric separately when it comes
up.
Yeah,
I did want to talk about that actually. So so you had some practice with the Animation Society?
Yeah, you know, we saw pretty much every animated film that came out, and went to monthly lectures with big names. The one I got the most out of was Bill Scott and June Foray, Rocky and Bullwinkle. Just, you know, that was terrific to me. I'd always done accents. The accents come easily to me.
Yeah.
And that really helps is when you have to learn new computer languages. But it also helped in improv scenes because I could do any accent, and some of them I could do well. You know, bad accents, okay, they're throwing something I'd never heard of. Well, okay, I do that. And I'd done a lot of improv acting, and I'd done a lot of work at the Renaissance Fair, and I'd had trips to England, and I had a solid half a dozen British accents, plus Scottish and Irish. So that's just 8 there, and then there's a lot of regional United States accents, and I do all of them, and several others besides. So this was easy to me. I knew what a loop was. I knew how to find a loop, and I just started counting. And we had enough artists assigned for long enough to handle about 900 animation loops. And there were a lot of cells as well, but cells are just a whole lot easier than a loop because you draw the cell, that's it. You know, one cell and it's done, whereas an animation loop could have up to 16 cells in it. And they have to blur from one to the next smoothly.
Okay.
So there is skill in that, whereas just a prop, that's just an image. And you might have to fiddle with how it attaches to something else. in a saddle. You know, so you might have to move the origin points a bit so that it attaches correctly. But that's easy. The animation loops are the hard part.
Yeah.
And it took me the better part of 3 weeks to do this. And this is not programming.
Right.
This is nothing like programming.
Right.
And but after 3 weeks, I had a count, and we needed 1,450 animation loops, and we only had enough time to create 900.
So I didn't realize y'all were doing a blur between the frames as well.
It's not so much a blur as it's just making sure that nothing breaks the loop. That's all.
Oh, okay.
You know, I mean, if you go back to Steamboat Willie and the images of how they made it, which was just drawing on a piece of paper that you kind of flap the paper through and you see the things move. But you just need to have everything move correctly based upon the prior cell and the next cell. Because, you know, if the leg is out of place, then it what I call breaks the loop is it just doesn't look right.
Speaking of Disney, so when I think of Cedric, the first thing that comes to mind is the old Disney film, The Sword in the Stone, and the owl character Archimedes. Had you seen that before, or?
I saw that as a kid. I wasn't thinking of that at all.
Right.
We're almost to the point where I started voicing Cedric, but I'm just trying to answer the prior question. So I had to get the loops solved, and then we had a big meeting, and it wasn't a very pleasant meeting. But we basically said, you have called for 50% more artwork than you were budgeted, and we have to make the game smaller in order to have all the artwork done in order to ship by November.
Oh, so this is the small version of Longbow.
Well, it is a different version of Longbow.
Yeah, it's kind of surprising to me to hear that because there's so much art in that game.
Well, the solution that I came up with, which was very bad of me, and I should have just kept my mouth shut and had Christy cut a lot. We can reuse a lot of the art by treating a different place that Robin Hood is as the same place on the smaller map, and reusing the backgrounds everywhere, and that means that the loops get reusable, and we just affix a disguise onto Robin Hood. And a whole lot of the extra loops were Robin Hood with different palettes, and Robin Hood looking differently because he's disguised, but instead of creating a separate loop for Robin Hood in this disguise, we use the base Robin Hood disguises and attach them to his face. Okay, so
you're doing that mainly to save time and not even really, doesn't really have to do with disk space, but just like saving development time.
Yeah, the artist, and that gets into the way we did walkers. Okay, the Sierra, for important characters, they had an 8-directional walker. And a walker is an animation loop of him walking in one of 8 cardinal points, compass points. And you use 8 so that it's very, the notion that he's walking at a bad angle goes away with 8.
Right. Yeah, that was the main change, I guess, from the 1980s to the 90s was the extra diagonal direction, right?
Right. But a big part of that is because improved art meant that things show up a lot more. I mean, the screens are effectively a lot bigger because the pixels are so much smaller. So that means you can walk a longer distance and still be on the screen, and that means it's obvious when you're not walking at the right angle. with the four directional walkers. And keep in mind that four is really three, because walking due north can't be flipped to walking due south. So those are two. But walking east and west, you can just use a mirror image on one of them. Okay?
Right.
So the 8 walkers wound up being 5, if I recall correctly, because we could mirror. But still, that's 3 extra loops for every different region that Robin Hood has to be in. So we reduced the number of regions, we reduced the number of rooms, and eventually got down to 900 loops. Okay, but the problem is that meant a whole lot of extra programming to track which time Robin was coming into a room, because he was repeating a lot of rooms based on disguises, and that was more programming.
So as soon as he leaves a room, you have to check for all that, make sure it's right.
Right. So that meant a regional variable, and the costume Robin is wearing. And I actually did a lot of the design on the costumes, because, and I hate to speak ill of her, but Christy had gotten a contract to write a Babylon 5 episode. And so at every programmer's meeting from January till June, I reported, we're behind schedule, we don't have enough design. And that's because she was working 2 jobs, and I suspect that the Babylon 5 paid very well and helped her career and all that, but it wasn't a lot of fun for us. After June, design came in fast, but you're never going to get those months back. So I knew enough of what had come ahead in order to start assigning specific tasks that I knew we'd need, even though the specific design hadn't come in yet. And that gets back to, how do I assign stuff? So I leaned a lot on Bob Fishbach, who was a very solid programmer, and probably would have been lead on Longbow if I hadn't been hired. And he helped guide me a lot, and then handed out various regions and rooms to the programmers I had. Starting around May, June, we got a bunch of new college graduates, so I got 3 of them. I considered all 3 excellent, and Chris Shankar, as far as I know, is still working at Microsoft Games. So he was just really, really good. And if I'd had them earlier, I'd have given Chris at least one of the regions, because he was just that good. And the programmers I had weren't all that good. So I had one Roland sound card for the 9 programmers I had at that time, and this was hard for me. This was really hard for me, because I'm a sound guy at heart. You know, I do the voices. I'm an auditory. I hear things really well, and I wanted to do the sounds, but I had a programmer that I thought was good enough, one of the 3 college students. And there's only one sound card, and I knew I had other duties, so I let her do all the sounds. Okay.
You mean like the Foley sounds, like the sound effects, or are you talking about, yes, like y'all were thinking about putting voices in?
The sound effects.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
We didn't do voices for Longbow.
Right, yeah. I was wondering, like, was that ever a consideration, or just like all the efforts were on King's Quest V to do that?
I think based on the initial King's Quest V sales, they decided that other games just didn't justify the expense. Okay, but King's Quest V CD sales, as I recall, kept on selling, because a lot of people put a CD-ROM drive on their computer replacement list.
Uh-huh.
And so it just kept on selling, and that was a factor. Okay. I think a voiced longbow would have done very well over time, but I don't think we had nearly enough good English accents at the company to have done that without going to Hollywood.
Right.
And Sierra resisted going to Hollywood until, I guess, Space Quest 4.
Mm.
Because once you go Hollywood, every production you do has to be using Hollywood voices.
Mm.
So instead of giving someone $10 and a copy of the game, or if they're outside Sierra, like my daughter got $100 for doing a voice that was a couple of hours for Hoyle Classic.
Mm-hmm.
And she got $100. I got $10 for 3 weeks of Cedric.
Oh man!
And they never gave me the copy of the game.
Really? So you had to buy King's Quest V?
No, at that point I was sick to death of King's Quest V.
Oh, so you never bought it?
Well, not the CD-ROM version.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
So
yeah,
that's just me.
Yeah, well, I do want to ask all about that. So so you started working on the voice work. Like, how long was that after you first started at Sierra?
A couple weeks.
Yeah, so that's what I was thinking. It must have been pretty soon. So, what was that audition process like?
Roberta Williams, who I'd never met, and I know nothing of the background of Sierra at this point. The only games I've been playing were really the Coles games. I'm kind of a real-time strategy player, so just preferences, and I have a wife and a daughter, and if I don't keep them happy, then my life falls apart.
Right.
Because they'll make sure it does. So I wasn't heavy into playing computer games, and I had softball and D&D and the Renaissance Fair and just all kinds of other stuff. So I started Sierra, and Roberta Williams calls me in for a meeting, and I don't know who she is really, and Corey explained very quickly, and so I don't know why, arguably the most important person at the company wants to talk to me. I've got to finish counting the animation loops, to find out if my game is even going to ship.
Right.
And at this point, I knew that we were way over 1,000, so I'm like desperation mode to finish that as quickly as I can. And she says, I understand. Her first words were, I'm Roberta Williams, and I understand that you have a theatrical background. And I said, well, yes, I do. And she said, we've interviewed everybody in Oakhurst and everybody in Fresno, and we have not found anyone to voice Cedric yet. I'm hoping you can do it. And I said, well, I'll give it a try. Tell me about Cedric. And she said, Cedric is an owl, but he's like a 5-year-old boy. Very, very smart. Frequently wrong, but doesn't think so because he's very, very smart. And he is intended to be the comic relief and a character that children can associate with. And she said, can you do that? And I said, boy, the BBC has just come out with the Chronicles of Narnia as a series, and there's a lot of talking owls, and they have all of the BBC radiophonic labs behind them making Cedric's voice making their owls' voices sound like really good owls. I don't think I can compete with that. And she said, I'm not asking you to compete with that. I'm asking you to do Cedric. So we spent about half an hour on different concepts, and it it became obvious real early that I was going to have to do all of Cedric in my falsetto, and I normally sing second bass. I have a deep voice, and that was going to be an issue, so I said, I don't think I can do falsetto for more than 4 hours a day. And she said, if that's all you can give us, that's all you can give us. And I said, I'm sorry, and I showed her after a while, I thought of the Bill Scott thingy with the war of the voice, and she really liked that, and she said, we'll do this every afternoon for 4 hours until it's done. And I said, okay, is it okay with my managers to know that I'm only going to be working half-time on the game I'm lead programmer on? And she said, I'm sure it'll be okay. So that was it. And the next day I go into the recording studio, and the start of every day for the first week, it took me a little bit of time to get into Cedric, just because it's so different from my normal voice. And so I spent all morning dealing with any issues that came up on longbow, and I think the only reason we picked afternoons was because I had a weekly programmers meeting in the morning, so I felt I had to attend that to stay on top of what other solutions the other games had found that longbow might benefit from, and the systems programmers told them where we were with new features that were coming in that we'd need, like talkers, and that was it. And then I had 3 weeks of destroying my falsetto.
Wow, it sounds like it would have been a really stressful time. So you moved to Oakhurst, you got a new house, you got your family there, you're 2 weeks on the job. They're still back in LA?
No, sorry. I moved to Oakhurst.
Oh, okay.
My wife and my daughter stayed in Los Angeles, where my wife was going to wait until they laid her off and then start at the Sierra Network, because the layoff was going to come with more than 6 months of severance pay.
Gotcha.
And our daughter was in kindergarten, and we just figured, when the end of the school year is just the perfectly natural time for her to move up to Oakhurst. So they came up in June, and I visited them once during those 3 weeks, but that, I leave after work on Friday, and I drive to Los Angeles, and I come back Sunday evening. And so it was stressful enough, and I was living at the Coles. We didn't have a rental house yet. And so yes, it was difficult, but I quickly found out that how important Roberta was, and did my best. And she was, and I've told this before, she was the best director or voice director I've ever worked under, and that's in a lot of plays. She knew exactly what each character was supposed to do, what each line was supposed to accomplish within the game. She wrote all of Cedric's lines, and one of my minor regrets with any other voice part I've done or acting part I've done, I'm also a writer, and I've written a lot of plays and stuff like that, and I would have made suggestions. Does this line play better like, and see if it does. But I didn't feel comfortable. I'm 2 weeks at Sierra,
right?
And I'm talking to the world's best-selling game designer, and suggesting that I might find a way to improve upon her work. I just wasn't willing to go there because I didn't know just how collaborative Sierra was at that time. And so I think Cedric could have been slightly better, but only slightly.
Yeah, I got a real kick out of Cedric as a kid, honestly, and it was kind of a new thing to have a sidekick character for the main protagonist. I did I did want to ask you. So, 5 years later, when Nintendo put out the Ocarina of Time, they had Link with a sidekick with Pixie that would follow him around. I don't know. Did you ever like think that that was like similar to Cedric at all? That mechanic?
Um, I thought that Link was like common to 100 movies
Mm-hmm.
and 1,000 plays,
Mm-hmm.
and it was not copyrightable. It was just an inevitable evolution as computers became more powerful. You have the computer power to have a sidekick that is with a highly animated protagonist character. That's all.
Yeah.
You know, it just required and for and the same on the consoles. They were never as powerful and still aren't as powerful as the PCs with a graphics card. But that doesn't mean they're not a whole lot better than they used to be.
Yeah, it was really mind blowing at the time though, because this was before. Pretty sure it was before I got the Super Nintendo. That you had King's Quest V that looked so beautiful and had actual like voice acting in it. It was really mind blowing at the time to see something so advanced because prior to that I had pretty much only been playing the NES. So it was such a leap forward. Did you
I bought my first PC in order to play Quest for Glory 1.
mhm.
And it wasn't that I couldn't have
which
bought
you
one sooner.
which you had worked on, right?
No,
Oh, you didn't work on that. Okay.
no. That was Corey and Lori's first game at Sierra.
Oh, okay, that was before you.
And
Gotcha.
that was like '88.
Okay.
And Corey was describing how to really get the full audio experience on the game, you needed a Roland sound card to play all 32 voices that they'd used in the music for the high-end version of the game. And so I built my own PC based on advice from good friends who mostly I ordered through. And I had to have one of the really first VGA monitors and the Roland LAPC1 sound card. And it sounded terrific. And it looked much better than any of the other games I'd gotten at the time, which were all EGA. Well, actually, this was an EGA game, but I bought for the next technology that I knew was coming along. And if I had it to do over, I'd have also gotten a CD drive. So today the CD drive I have on this computer that doesn't have one, but it's a gaming laptop, was $50 and is a USB.
Right.
I've got 2 USB extenders on this thing. So that was the first computer game I played on my own computer. I always been spending a chunk of time at arcades.
Yeah, I got a lot of fond memories of being at the arcade at the mall. So did you when you were working on Cedric, did you ever cross paths with Josh Mandel at all, or were y'all in separate areas of the building, or?
The guy that was constantly nudging me while I was reading my lines, trying to get me to break character.
Really?
Josh Mandel.
Oh.
Not constantly, but
Yeah.
Yeah, because we were sidekicks. He and I were the only 2 people that were pretty much the only 2 that were in the recording booth at the same time.
Oh, okay.
Okay, there are technical advantages to recording separately because then I don't make noise that interrupts his reading and vice versa. And we did some lines with a third person in the booth. But the more people in the booth, the greater the chance that one of them's going to breathe a little too heavy,
Right.
and ruin a good take. They were highly directional phoned up mics. So every line I recorded for Cedric, Graham was there, because as an actor, it just helps a ton to have the person you're acting with in the same recording booth as you. So we got better performances out of being in the same room. But it also meant we needed a few retakes. And that's when the sound guys gave me a nickname of One Take Aronson. Because I'd done a lot of voice acting before. I mean, all the work at the Renaissance Fair is spoken in accent, and the very faint English accent that I gave to Cedric was my idea, as I worked it out with Roberta. So I just was good at that, and I didn't know that I could collaborate with Roberta, so I wasn't even thinking about that at all. I was focused on, this is my line, read it. And some of them were a little too long to be done in one take, so I said, I'm going to split this up into 2 or 3, and I'd read a line and pause, and they'd pause the recording, and I'd take a deep breath, and I'd read the next part of the line and stop, and you know, no line took me more than 3. Roberta was good at that, but breathing is a big part of the voice recording. You have to read as much of the line as you can without taking a breath, because breaths are uninteresting and all have to be edited out. And the editing process is difficult unless there's a gap with no sound at all between the line and the breath. Okay, either on the intake or on the exhale. So, you know, I figured it out, and I actually accomplished Cedric on about the schedule that they wanted to, but that was more me being efficient than anything else. I have a weird brain, I know it, and one of the things I'm really good at is settling down to do lots of scut work. And for me, Cedric was scut work. It was very repetitive. It was find the voice and then stay in that voice for 4 hours. It was my neck hurts before I finish. It was my falsetto starting to go. And so I can hear on a line whether it was recorded early in the day or late in the day based on the quality of my falsetto. And I can hear whether it was recorded in the first week or the third week based upon the quality of the falsetto. And, you know, if I'd had it to do over again, if I'd started work at Sierra a couple months earlier, I'd have been doing Cedric when all the other voices were being done, and I'd have done 2 hours a day, and Cedric would sound a lot better. You know, but we didn't have the time, and until I finished Cedric, I couldn't work full-time on my game. I just didn't think that voice acting was ever going to be a potential career. Not if they're paying me $10 for all of Cedric.
Yeah, so they were, I guess, still paying you your, lead programming salary, but
they did pay me my
the $10.
lead programming salary.
How did you get a check?
I made up all those hours.
Did you get a check for $10, like for Cedric?
I think I did.
Okay.
It's been a long time, and it was only $10.
Yeah.
You know, they made me. Yeah, those were cut from a different. Yeah, I got a separate check for all the voice parts I did.
Okay, nice. Yeah, one thing I like about the role of the character is that he doesn't so much help Graham, but he narratively sets up the mood of different scenes. Like before he's going off into the desert, he'll say something about how scared he is of the desert, and so normally the player would just walk straight out into the sand and not really think that much about it. But I think he did play a good emotional kind of narrative role and kind of telling the audience how to feel about a certain area, right?
That was all Roberta's writing.
Yeah.
And it was wonderful because there were notes, and the lines itself are a guideline as to how I should voice the character. And I haven't had that before or since to that level of detail. So that helped me a lot as an actor, to be able to impart into Cedric's tone exactly the right emotional beat for what's coming forth. And that was terrific. That was to me one of the few fun parts of voicing Cedric. Was just the quality of the lines I had to deal with and how they guided me to play the role well.
And did you record chronologically? So did y'all record it from the beginning of the game to the end, or was it out of order?
As I recall it, we were not jumping around much, but we did have to do a little jumping around because of scenes with Bill Davis's character, where the three of us were in the recording booth. He had gone from effectively the director of all art to become the director of all the creative employees, and so he was very, very busy. So I think we did that one out of schedule, but I recall the rest as being in schedule. Keep in mind, I hadn't played the game, so a lot of these lines were just completely meaningless to me. And when I started at Sierra, they told me I should play a recent Sierra game. Space Quest would probably be a good one. And if they'd said King's Quest V would be a good one, then I'd have been a lot more familiar with it. But so I was really in the deep end and just completely trusting that I was being told the right things to do.
Right. Yeah, it's pretty. Must have been pretty amazing to go from the world of banking to you're out here with this wild creative company. You're recording voice roles. You're organizing a whole other game. You've got these programmers you got to manage. Sounds like a whirlwind.
And what made it worse was I think it was my first or second week there. Longbow had a programmer that couldn't climb stairs, so we were in the development space on the ground floor. And over the cubicle wall, that wasn't for my benefit, was for the benefit of the head of the Sierra Network. I heard Ken Williams reaming the guy out because he'd signed a overly generous contract with AT&T to be the backbone for the network, and it was not pleasant to be a new employee who'd taken a very significant pay cut to start work at Sierra and have Ken tell the manager of the Sierra Network that every negotiation has a winner and a loser, whether it's an employee asking for a raise or whether you're signing a multi-million-dollar deal with AT&T and you lost this one, and I do not take losing. And I almost went home. Almost went back to Los Angeles and begged for my old job back, where they would have taken me in a second, and had my own office where I didn't have to hear things like that, because I knew I had lost my negotiation on this huge pay cut I'd taken. It was a very scary time, but my wife talked me out of it, and we would have a lot more money if we'd stayed in Los Angeles. I'll put it that way.
Well, you're you're definitely a part of history this way, though. You've got a lot of clout, I guess, in the digital world, or infamy.
It led to a lot of really good things, and as far as I'm concerned, one of the better moments of my life was the time I went in to teach in a classroom, and one of their laptops was already hooked up to the overhead. And as soon as I got in the classroom, they turned off and closed the door. They turned off the lights and started playing Cedric off of YouTube.
Nice.
And they were all smiling, because to these people who would go on to be making games for a living, Cedric was a part of their childhood, and they really enjoyed that part.
Well, I think I think the game made an impression on a lot of people because, at the time it was, the best looking game out there with the best sound. It was the first one with voice acting. And so,
Sure.
yeah, it was mind blowing at the time to see something like that.
Um, it was brilliant, and most of the major innovations came onto King's Quest games because they sold the best, and I thought that was fine. Some of the other designers were not as thrilled with the budgets that the King's Quest got that they didn't, but I think the Sierra attitude was create a game that sells really well and you'll get bigger budget,
Mm.
and that happened, I think, for the Larrys.
Mm.
You know, it's it was very fun much of the time, and it was very scary much of the time. And to me, the big disadvantage of making computer games is I can no longer play computer games or watch movies in the same way.
Yeah, I feel the same way. Yeah.
What had been a hobby is now my career. And there was nothing worse for me than watching the Harry Potter movie where they're doing the trying to win the Triwizards Cup,
Um.
and a dragon starts chasing Harry Potter on his broom. That's not in the book.
Oh,
There's
right.
no reason for it to be on the screen except that they're going to use exactly the same animation loops in the computer game, because the computer games now make more money than the movies do for the big budget games and movies that are coordinated, and they share the same art assets. And that's why you just can't look at them the same way if you're working in the industry. So I'm enjoying movies less, and I'm
Really?
enjoying playing computer games less.
Were you a Harry Potter fan when those books came out?
No.
Oh, really?
I was a Harry Potter fan after my daughter said, "Hey, I've read this Harry Potter book, and I bet you'd all like it."
Mm.
And that was about book 5.
Mm. He also has a an owl companion as well. So
But it's not speaking. Thank
yeah,
God.
exactly, not the same.
If it was a speaking character, I'm sure some voice director said, "Hey, this guy did Cedric so many years ago. Maybe we could get him for this owl." You know,
I think.
that one of the biggest mistakes of my career was, like I said, I had done a lot of acting before and a lot of voice work before I started at Sierra.
Yeah.
And I told them, I'll audition for some voices if I feel that I have the time.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't hired to be a voice actor. I was hired to be a lead programmer. And if you find a voice that you think you're having trouble with casting, ask me. And if it's not too big a voice, I can make the time. I can always make the time for a short shoot. But I'm really only going to audition if I have the time at work, because I don't like having to make up all my programming time after my voice time.
Mm.
And
Right.
so Gano was the one that asked me most often. But I think they post all the parts that they were casting on bulletin boards for people to read. And I don't think I was asked to do Ramses, but I might have been, because Gano and Jane Jensen were fairly close, and as I recall, they were both there. They asked me to do the shaman at the end of EcoQuest, because nobody else was coming close to the level of joy they were thinking of.
And did you program on that one at all, or no?
No, I was just a voice.
Just a voice. Okay.
The games I worked on at Sierra proper as a programmer were Longbow and Quest for Glory 1 VGA version.
Oh, the VGA. Okay, that's what I was thinking earlier, that you had worked on Quest for Glory, but it was the remake.
It was was the remake.
Right.
And then the Hoyle Classic.
Yeah.
And then they transferred me to the Sierra Network.
So did they know you were a bridge champion when?
I wasn't.
You weren't at the time?
I earned my championship after.
Oh, wow.
I started at Sierra. Two big things. First of all, every bridge club in the country allowed smoking at that time. And smoking doesn't bother me. I don't smoke, but, the smell doesn't bother me. But my wife is bothered a lot, And she said, if you're going to go play bridge in an evening, you're going to take a shower before you get into bed. And taking a shower wakes me up, so then I don't sleep. So I gave up bridge, and it wasn't hard. Because Dungeons and Dragons is a much better game. And, I gave up chess for bridge. This was the evolution of me. And, the problem was in the 70s, I was one of the best young bridge players in Los Angeles. And in the 90s, I was still one of the best young bridge players in Los Angeles because bridge has been aging. And I gave it up, and then Ken comes up to me one day and says, we need you to program a bridge game for us. I said, okay. How long do you think it'll take you? And I said, well, if we want to be at all competitive with the other bridge games out there, about 3 years. And he said, you have 6 months. And, well, if I'm going to be programming bridge, and I'd already been doing in my evening hours as just a present, because it was fun, I've been adding on features to the Sierra Network and Sierra Network Bridge. And these were, right after Longbow shipped, I started running a role-playing game on the Sierra Network. And really the longevity and type of my career arc at Sierra was driven by this first role-playing game. I took a week to design my own system because I was worried about copyright infractions if I used one of the published systems. And, so that saved Sierra a lawsuit, I'm sure. And Chris Williams got into my first role-playing game that was hand-run Drake's Peak in a conference room. And after the first session, I said, we've got to have a whisper, we've got to have a mute, we've got to have an upload, a way to upload a pre-printed text file. These shouldn't be hard, but we have to have them if you're going to be running a conference. It was the first time the conference room had been full for anything except everybody's going to test this now. And it was so full that people that got locked out couldn't get back in, and I couldn't create characters because there were 24 players. So it was just hard.
So this was the first. This was the first online chat room. So you guys were pioneering like the ability to mute people,
right,
and send stuff back and forth through internet chat rooms.
And shared dice rolling. Okay,
right.
So that you can roll for treasure picks, kind of thing.
So yeah, a lot of people don't. A lot of people remember Sierra for their adventure games, but they don't know so much about the pioneering work that y'all were doing for the internet at that time.
Yes. There was a lot of stuff we did, and that was before Acervius. And I got to test Acervius before it came out, and I thought it was too buggy. And it was. But
and you were doing a lot of...
very popular.
You were doing a lot of server work back then. Were you programming in SQL, or what language were you using for that?
I have to ask my wife.
Oh, okay.
I don't touch servers. I'm a PC programmer.
Okay, I gotcha.
She's a real programmer. She's the good one. This all goes back to me teaching myself BASIC in 1973-74, so that I could have a program to calculate my T-intervals on my chemistry labs, because that was a lot of repetitive math work, and I thought, gee, a programmer would save me a bunch of time. And if I'd really been the kind of Winklevoss less capitalist, I would have sold access to my program to everyone else in chemistry. And they'd have thanked me. Boy, would they have thanked me. And I taught myself BASIC as a freshman because that was the only language they let freshmen access to. And that led to multiple jobs and everything else. But no formal instruction there. I had formal instruction for some of my other languages, but that led to all this other stuff. So I wasn't working on the servers, but I worked with the server programmers often, especially once I transferred to the Sierra Network in '93 after Hoyle shipped. And when we were doing our big rewrite, which was going to enable the cyber park, and we started that for AT&T, which had bought us from Sierra at a big profit, and then AT&T decided they didn't need to be in the content business and sold us to AOL. And AOL gave everybody a whole bunch of stock options that sounded terrific, but they weren't planning on letting us cash them in, and they laid almost everybody off.
Oh, wow.
Just before they vested.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So I can say AOL is scum because of the terms of my layoff agreement, but my wife can't. So whenever she wants me to say AOL is scum, she looks at me and goes, "Richard," and which is also an accent. That's the way my grandmother always called my name.
Oh, really? I heard a little bit of Cedric in there, actually. So I
Yes.
don't know.
Well,
yeah.
I'm sort of mimicking my grandmother, and
Okay.
so does she.
Gotcha.
But it's out of love. She had a very thick Russian accent, and then I say AOL is scum because they are.
Yeah. Well, you guys were really ahead of your time with a lot of this. I'm curious what you think about the current state of online gaming. I mean, we've got Twitch, which is huge. It's like nonstop online game streaming. There's on YouTube as well, a lot of online gaming. I mean, what do you think about the whole online gaming scene? Is it like what you guys were dreaming of back then, or has it fallen short in any way? Or
I think it has definitely fallen short in one major way. After the Sierra Network shut down, I started working for a startup called Explorati, and we envisioned ourselves as building the backbone for platforms to build out role-playing games. And that meant a lot of technical problems that needed to be solved, and that had never been solved before, and some haven't been really solved yet. And the biggest of those, in my opinion, was an automated story engine. Because if you play World of Warcraft, you're basically doing the same old stuff with different characters over and over again because there's no new content. And I spent the better part of 6 months thinking about this. Same as when I built my dungeon way back when. And you're familiar with indirect variables in C++, where a star means refer to the content of this variable. So
like a pointer, I think people would call it.
The pointer, yeah. Keep in mind that C++ is probably my least good language. Because by the time I started learning C++, I was a full-time game designer.
Right.
Who had to learn C++ for my games.
Yeah, I think it hadn't been invented back then, yeah.
C existed.
Right.
And the C book goes back to the late 70s.
Oh, okay, right.
But in any case, my wife was programming in C++. It was common on servers. So that redirection, that pointer, is the same way you could build a story engine by writing stories in a different way than they'd ever been written before. but it wasn't hard to learn. It was a very easy way to learn. So instead of saying, and the example I'm giving is just based on, say, a modern world game, you don't have to use the words FBI. You just have a pointer to a table that looks up a good guy police organization for a crime game, and then they find one that you have some kind of relationship with in your past. And this is storing the same data that you're already storing to do World of Warcraft, for example. Have you finished this? Have you acquainted with? Do these people know you? Those are all flags that are being set so that the dialogue makes sense as you progress along the quest tree. But those quest trees are all handwritten. And if you use your history to point to local police organizations, local criminal organizations that have some relationship with your prior organizations. So if you need enemies to thwart you here, they look at who's related to people you've thwarted before. If you're playing a Laura Bow kind of character, or any kind of detective kind of character.
Right.
So that was a tough problem to solve, but once solved, it's relatively easy. Nobody has a procedural story engine as good as what I could build for Explorati. No, but none that I've seen are close. And I've talked to a couple of people, and they say, well, we can do a procedural engine all on our own. And I hope they can, but I still haven't seen it. So that would be my biggest regret. One of the other things that we did at Explorati was we always envisioned that sysops were going to become actors for an online role-playing game. So we'd have AI do the simple stuff, and if the questions got into something else, then you'd have actors who could inhabit the character and give them custom-built dialogue, which would make it seem very fresh. They just write it themselves on the fly because they know the character, and maybe even do the voices if they did the voices. And if people wanted to become sysop actors, then we audition them and we pay them because that's added content. And so these concepts were designed to make the world better, the story better, the game better.
Yeah, we're still at the very beginnings of AI and having synthesized voices that actually sound like a natural voice, But yeah, I think industry is definitely headed in that direction.
It'll get there someday, but it could be much farther along right now. And when I started work on Oil Classic Bridge, every computer bridge game in the world, in order to make a bid, you clicked on a number from 1 to 7, then you clicked on the suit, clubs, diamonds, hearts, spades, or no trump, and then you clicked an enter key, and then it tells you if your bid is legal. Because in bridge, if you bid up to 2 hearts, 2 clubs, and 2 diamonds, and 2 hearts are now illegal bids. Okay? And that's wasteful, and that's extra clicks, and we have VGA by then, by gosh. And so I created a bidding screen which had all 35 legal bids. There's only 35 of them. On a layout from 1 club all the way up to 7 no trump. And as bids became illegal, we grayed them out. So you never have the option of an illegal bid because it's grayed out. And then the pass and the double and the redouble, those are handed at the bottom based upon when each is legal. Pass is always legal. And so 38 bids all on one screen, 1 click if you turn off the verify option, or 2 clicks if you want to make sure you're making the right bid. Okay, so, and that isn't universal, but that is now widely used. And, but I've been badly burned by writing proposals to add design work to existing online bridge games that took my proposals and never paid me.
Oh, really?
And I'm really not interested in helping them anymore because I don't trust them. But yeah, the AI on bridge, computer bridge is not solved. Chess is solved. Go is now solved.
Right.
The best chess player in the world, the best Go player in the world is a computer. And it'll take a while for bridge and poker to be solved because those are games of incomplete information. You don't know everything. That makes it a lot harder. You have to do inferences, and computers cannot read body language, and computers cannot draw inferences well from human behavior. One of the advantages of online games for bridge and poker is they can disguise how long someone took to make a decision. So you don't know who's taking a long time to make the decision necessarily. And that's a big benefit because the bridge pros, they can draw those inferences. So anyway, I got put on Hoyle Classic way back when, and then I said, well, if I'm doing this and I'm doing all this design work for the Sierra Network in my spare time, not being paid for it, I might as well take bridge seriously again. So Corey and I started playing as partners again, and I've got my certified tournament director license, and started paying attention to these kinds of things, and I didn't stop playing bridge because I wasn't good at it or didn't like it, but by now bridge had gone non-smoking. So and it was with Corey in '94 that we won our national title. But it also got me to, Sierra allowed me to meet many of the best bridge players in the world, and discuss lots of things that I never expected to discuss before. And I've got a thanks to credit on Bridge for Dummies by Eddie Cantor, who is one of my bridge heroes, and he had me write most of that, most of the section for online bridge.
Oh, wow.
Because he just didn't understand. He didn't follow all of the things. He just played online bridge at this one thing. So, and I cherish that. I cherish that Eddie Cantor knows me. I cherish that Terry Pratchett knew my name before he died, and I got into his long-term memory. And that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't been working at Sierra and going to Conference Cisco to meet with Steve Jackson on possibly licensing GURPS for the Sierra Network, and as a role-playing game background. So that's why I was in San Francisco to meet Terry Pratchett after one of his talks. And, so a lot of great stuff has happened to me because of Sierra.
Yeah, it sounds like for someone who likes to work on a lot of different projects and pursue a lot of different intellectual pursuits. It seems like a great job where you're always kind of working on something new every year, every 6 months, rather than just doing the same thing day after day.
Well, keep in mind, I was working at night a lot on other projects. When I was at Sierra, I was working on TSN projects, and then to finish the Runes of Cawdor, there'd been some.
And that was the online. That was the online role-playing game.
Online role-playing game,
yeah.
And there'd been some managers who left the company in my chain of command. The director of all game development had gone to work for Microsoft, and the director of programmers had gone to work for somebody in Orange County, and nobody was telling me what was going on at a managerial level. And at a managerial level, my game that I promised would be done by February did not need to be done by February because the programmers were 6 months late on the server rewrite. That my game was going to be like one of the alpha test games on. So to make the last push, I worked 35 straight days of at least 12 hours. Okay, no time off at all. I am counting the time that I traveled to Austin to meet with Steve Jackson and the meetings and the time to fly back as work time, because I worked 6 hours the day before we left and 8 hours the day after I got back. And I was in meetings all of the time in Austin. So, yeah, I don't miss that at all. I'm sorry, but, I made a commitment and I made my date, and then they said, what are we going to do with you now? We're 6 months off. And so management came back to me and said, can you make the game bigger for the next 6 months? And I thought about it a bit, and I said, yeah, okay. And I added a few more rooms and some new puzzles. That was, as I recall, that includes the first three-dimensional puzzle in a two-dimensional format game.
Really?
For any role-playing game.
Well, I did want to kind of tie things together. We've been talking for 2 hours now. It's been absolutely fascinating. But a lot of my work is in voice recognition and adventure games right now, and I think that we're just at the very beginnings of adventure games, of interactivity, of online play. I think this whole genre is going to be absolutely huge going forward, because I feel like a lot of the work you guys were doing was so far ahead of its time that we're just now putting together the tools to really make this accessible to a worldwide audience. And so I think all the innovating you guys were doing is really crucial for the gaming industry going forward.
Everything is built upon what comes before. That's how science works. And Sierra created a collaborative environment, and I guess it goes back to that's the way Roberta likes to work, where she never thought she knew it all. And she was quite willing to listen to ideas from anybody that might make her game better. And, I'm sorry that the only project I worked on with her was the one project where I wasn't making any suggestions because I was terrified of getting fired. Because my wife would have been very sad if she couldn't get to move to Yosemite. And we still have our house in Oakhurst. Although I'm in Camarillo right now because that's the way things worked out.
Right.
So yes, Sierra was a great place, and I think to a large extent its innovations were in processes, the most important ones. It really helps getting a lot of different perspectives on a different game. If for nothing else, then you get different dialogue out of different characters that doesn't sound like it was all written by the same person. And for the voice lines, that can be really important. I think Roberta was just extremely good at imagining how the voices should be different. And there's a reason why I had to play Cedric, and that's because nobody else could match her vision of the voice. It wasn't because I'm this particularly good guy at falsetto. I'd have cast a woman with a soprano range as Cedric, and then just add in the small thing and teach them the voice warble. But you needed to know the voice warble in order to bring it to it. And collaboration is always Sierra. Creativity, bringing different people's ideas together. That was the biggest thing. And I don't see enough of that these days anymore, where a game may have 100 designers focusing on very small things. You lose out on collaboration when your job is very tiny, very specialized.
Yeah, I was really inspired actually to learn that a lot of the teams behind some of my favorite games were so small. It's so impressive, all the different jobs you were doing on each game. You would think it would be a warehouse of 200 people, but it might be a team of less than 50 people working on it. It's absolutely spectacular. It's been absolutely fascinating. Like I said, I've been working with you for a while. It's been a real treat. And I've been wanting to ask you about all this stuff for a long time, and so I'm glad we were able to record this. So thank you so much for making some time for me.
It's my pleasure. If it helps people appreciate the game a little bit more, then it's all worth it. And maybe there's some kid out there that wants to know about voice and is now aware that there is an animation society or some programmer out there who wants to know how these are done. And I've been fairly liberal in talking about some of the techniques that I've used and that might teach budding people how to be a little bit better at becoming programmers.
Yeah, well, I'm sure you've affected more people than you even know about with all the beautiful work you've done.
Well, yeah, but a lot of them are saying, boy, Cedric's such a doof. And I keep on saying, I tell everyone, I didn't write the lines. Roberta wrote, it's a poisonous snake. And why did she write that? Because kids will understand poisonous and might not understand venomous. And that, to me, is an acceptable reason of violating the dictionary. She wanted Cedric to be her Jar Jar Binks, and I think Cedric came out well before Jar Jar Binks.
Well, they say there's a quote that the opposite of love is not hatred. The opposite of love is indifference, and no one that plays that game is indifferent towards Cedric. Everybody has an opinion on it. I can tell you, I absolutely loved it as a kid. The
sound department played Cedric for every tour that came through Sierra.
Oh, really?
And at one time when I was working on Quest for Glory, I was across the hall from the sound department. I had to hear because the tours were always too large to fit in, so the doors were open. And the children were all mesmerized, and the parents were mostly rolling their eyes. And I have to hear Cedric again and again and again, and the other programmers would throw things at me because they had to hear Cedric again and again, and I was a target. Not mean things. They roll up a piece of paper, but the purpose of art is to evoke an emotional response, and Cedric does that, and that was Roberta and me.